So, in this video, let us talk about a little bit of networking, subnetting, and all. There is a lot more to learn in Amazon subnetting. So, let us start with the simple thing and then go to some complicated stuff. So, the first we are going to talk about is VPC. So, this is how Amazon gives us the ability to create our own subnets. So till now, whenever we used a resource in Amazon, for example, EC2, DynamoDB, or S3, for accessing these resources, Amazon gave us some default infrastructure without we knowing anything about it. But that is not the case with serious production deployment. So there we may have to look into what is the IP address the EC2 instances is going to get. All these things matter. So because of this, again, this is not an elaborate discussion on IP addressing or subnetting. A little bit of IP addressing and terms like a suitor is assumed here. So the offering, the service that we are going to learn is virtual private cloud. So using this virtual private cloud, you can create your own virtual space of your own IP addresses that can be used for your instances that you are going to create or resources you are going to create. So the virtual private cloud gives us the ability to have a subnetting of ourselves, and of course there are certain restrictions that you need to be aware of. So you can have multiple virtual private cloud in the region. I am sorry about the VPS; it is VPC. So you can have a maximum of five. So it is region scoped. So in every region, you are going to use any of the resources. I mean EC2. You can create VPCs there, but there is a soft limit. You can only create five VPCs in a region. But of course, this is a soft limit. So if you want to increase the count of the VPCs, you just need to raise a ticket with the Amazon. That's all. And then we call what is known as a CIDR. CIDR, the full form of CIDR is classless internet domain routing. Why CIDR came into existence is because we cannot use all the public IP addresses. We may have to, because we know in our company internally we use private IP addresses, and many departments may be separated with their own private IP addresses. So these private domains has to communicate with each other. Not only that, they may have to communicate with the outside world. They need to be able to access the internet. So for these reasons, we use CIDR. And there are some restrictions. We will talk about, or we will see at least the way we are going to use CIDR. Again, I assume, or I would request you to go through a little bit of IP addressing and subnet mask. That's all. If you know about these two, then CIDR is known to you. So the minimum size of the CIDR should be a 28 that you can give in Amazon VPC or subnet, which consists of 16 IP addresses, and the maximum CIDR is 16. You can have this many. 16 IP addresses means this many number of nodes or EC2 instances or whatever resources can be given. So 28 means that particular subdomain can have 16 instances of whatever resources you are going to create. If you are going to use a 16, that means you have some 65,536 IP addresses available for you to give to your host. And of course, VPC is private, so only private IP ranges are allowed. So just as a Heads up to you, you need to know about IP addressing, like what are the different types of classes or classes specifications in IP. There are three classes: class A, class B, and class C, that determines the IP address range. And then you need to understand about the subnet mask. So if you know both these, then when you give a subnet mask, how many subnets can be created, how many hosts can be created using that subnet mask. These things you need to understand whatever I am saying right now. This is not the time and place to talk about IP addressing. So I assume, if you remember, I had asked you whether you know IP addressing. Some of you had said yes. So I take it, and that's why I'm going forward with this. So you can only use private IP addressing in VPC. You can use any of these ranges: 10, 10, or 172, or the I address that we use to get to our local computer from our internet service providers. We can use any of these IP addresses. So we will start with a minimal creation of a VPC. So it will look like this in the Amazon. And once we cover this, we are going to create two subnets inside that: a public subnet and a private subnet. What is a public subnet? That means anybody will be able to access resources that is available in the public subnet. The private subnet means it is kind of a DMC zone, where the data, for example, databases or any kind of data, will be kept. So this is what we are going to do as a hands-on. So let us go directly into the Amazon. So for just like any other resources, we will type VPC, click on the VPC services. Here you can see all of the details that is already existing in my particular workspace, because I have logged in with my user credentials and I didn't create any VPC. Because if you remember, we will get some default VPC along with a lot of infrastructure that is required for our EC2 or any resource that we create to work. So you can see that I have in my region, I am in the North Virginia region, where I have one VPC by default. I have some six subnets. We have some routing tables. I have an internet gateway. I have an egress, some DHCP options. I don't have any elastic IP because I haven't created any resources yet, because I deleted all those things. So these are, and of course you can see some network access control lists. We will be talking about each of these individually, because these are required for our resources to be accessed from the outside world, as well as our resources to be able to access other resources from the outside world or between the other resources. So these things are a must. So first, you create a VPC using the wizard, but I will use another way. So let me go to your VPCs here, and then you can see that there is a create VPC. Already a VPC exists, which is, I told you, this is the default VPC. But as I told you, we won't be using this default VPC, because we want to have some control over the IP addresses that our instances is going to get. So let us go ahead and create this VPC. So you can give a name. So I will use CTS demo VPC as the name of this VPC. Then you need to create the what is the IP address range that you are going to use. The not in exactly in the VPC, but the subnets that this VPC is going to be attached to. So I will go with the 192, and for your information, Amazon uses this 172.31. We will come to see that later. I will go with the 192.168 dot 0.0, and with how much should I give? With a CIDR of 16. So what does this mean by 192.168.0.0? So this is the IP address with a CIDR of 16. That's where I assume you to have some knowledge of CIDR. If you don't have that much knowledge, there is a particular site here um, called CIDR to IP version 4 addressing. This may come handy to you if you want to find out for a particular CIDR with an IP address how many IP addresses can be available. For example, I'm giving this 192.168.0.0 with a CIDR of 16, and if you give it here, it will tell you what will be the first IP address, the last IP address, and the total number of host or IP addresses. You can see here the what exactly is the network mask. This is what this header means. 16 means the last that means to 16 means the first 255 or 255 is what is this represented by this 16. And then what exactly is the, if I give this particular suitor, what will be the first IP address that can be assigned, and then what exactly is the last IP address that can be assigned. So and then here also we will not assign this as 0 because this will be the subnet, and this will be the broadcast. So these two things cannot be assigned to any host because this is where the subnet what is the network ID, and then this is the last IP, which is the broadcast ID, which we won't be assigning to anybody. Whichever IP address coming in between will be assigned, just for your information. So this means that of course there will be 65,536 IP addresses or total host in this particular VPC. And then let us go down, and you can see I'm not going to into the IP version 6. So there is a tendency of default or dedicated. Please only select default. Dedicated means they are going to have some dedicated hardware for this particular VPC, and the hardwares you are going to use, and it will start incurring a cost. So go for default, and already there is a tag with the name there. I will go ahead and create the VPC. And you can see the VPC has been created. You can get some information about the CIDR that I have used, and some of the so you can see when we created this VPC, a DHCP is already set for us. A routing table has been created for us, and a network access control list is also created for us. We will come to those things later. So a VPC has been created as of now. But VPC is just to define a logical representation of our domain. But then to represent, if you remember in one of the slides, we are going to create inside the VPC, we are going to create the subnets. I will be creating two subnets here. One is the public subnet and a private subnet. So let us go back, and you can see in the subnets tab or the link, you will be able to see the subnets or create the subnets. Already there are a lot of subnets. These subnets you can see this is from the default VPC. But we are going to create our own subnets. So let us create on the create subnet link or the button. Here you will be asked about which is the VPC you want this subnet to be associated to. I want the CTS demo VPC to be associated, so I will click on that. And then what exactly is the name? This is for just logical before we need to understand. So I will give, so as I told you, I will be creating a public CTS subnet, and I will give a name of A, public CTS subnet A. And if you want to have any preference, as I told you, I am in the North Virginia region. So if you want the this particular subnet to be used in a particular region, you can, if there is no preference, Amazon will assume something for you. So let me select a East 1A because I have give the subnet A. That's the only reason you can. And then what will be the IP address of those hosts or instances you are going to create? I am going to tell 192.168. What should I give? Dot 1.0, and you can give 24. That means there will be at least let me see how many IP addresses. So in this particular subnet, I'm going to give a CIDR of 192.168.1.0, and that is enough. Let us create the subnet. So the subnet has been created, clicking on which I will get details of that particular subnet here. And you can see, because I gave the CIDR of 24, I have a I can give 251 available. So what exactly this 168 1.0 dot 254 1.0 24 gives us and calculate it. You can see the first IP address will be 1.0 and the last IP address will be 1.255. Again, don't forget, I hope you can see this. This is ipaddressguide.com, and if you go there in the IP version tool, you can see the ping, the trace route, decimal, or the CIDR. I am actually here, the CIDR, which so it's a shortcut for classless inter-domain routing, an IP address schema that replaces the old system based on class A, B, and C. It doesn't replace the old system. A, B, and C is still valid, but then it gives us the ability to use private IP addressing. So you can see how many IP addresses are happening here. So we have created a single subnet. Let us create one more subnet for our private. So again, I will select the VPC that I have created, and I will name the subnet as private CTS subnet. Maybe I will give a B so that I will have a another location or facility. So from this particular region, the availability zone. And then what exactly is the so I will give 192.168.2.0 probably, but then I don't want, for example, suppose I have only very minimal requirement, then I will give for 128. So let us see how many IP addresses we are going to get in this range. I will paste it here and see, and you can see there are the 16 hosts that will be, that means 16 IP addresses will be available to us. Let me create the subnet. And you can see that the CTS subnet has been given. If I select this one, you can see the number of, so now even though this particular location gave us 16 hosts, the you can see that there is only 11 hosts that can be used by or that's what Amazon tells me, that you can also only 11. There is some internal details. Some 5 IP addresses will be used internally. um, uh, the subnet ID and the broadcast ID cannot be used. So already 2 is gone. Some 5 is internally being used by the Amazon itself, and that is the reason we are only left with 11. So just keep that in mind when you design a particular IP schema. So let's contain the discussion. We will again use this going forward, because we want to deploy an easy to and get access to it by using the VPC and the subnet that we created. We will do that in the from the next video onwards. So bye for now.